Welcome back, everybody. This evening, I'm going to talk about none other than the Terminator. Now, this movie it's always been one of my very favorite movies, period. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, but it goes far beyond nostalgia. I saw this in 1984, and they took me to see it at the theater. I was only 7 years old, and I never forgot it. I have such nostalgia for it. And actually, the Terminator, this classic original, is my very favorite Terminator out of all the Terminators, even more than Terminator 2. As much as I love Terminator 2, and I think they just did such a fantastic job with the special effects, they did just a tremendous job, everybody did. I still like the first one. I still like the first one the best. It's still my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, even though I love so many of his films, including you're probably gonna laugh, but I just go by my taste. Conan the Destroyer, Red Sonja. I really like Commando, and of course like Total Recall, True Lies, and all the big ones. But my personal favorites are the Terminator. I know you're gonna laugh, but kind of like Red Sonja, I got a lot of nostalgia for it. Conan the Destroyer and the first Conan. I like The Running Man. I like The Predator is awesome. I really like Twins. It was different, but it was well done. It was really a good movie. But tonight I'm talking about the Terminator, and I'll tell you why. And by the way, when I mention like Red Sonja and others, people think, "What? That's really one of your favorites?" Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because the way I look at it is, if your movie entertains me, if you have a movie that entertains me, I'll choose it over a movie that's more well done. That's just the way nowadays. Maybe when I was younger, I was a little different, but nowadays, I mean, if I'm entertained, it skyrockets because you've entertained me. So that's just the way I look at it. But the Terminator, it is so well done, by the way. It's not only a movie that I enjoy and I'm really fascinated by, the time traveling aspect to it, the action, the slasher element, the shoot 'em up element, the way Arnold, he plays such a good villain. I love him as a hero, but especially I like him when he's a hero usually the most. But he does such a good job as the evil Terminator. And I remember when I first saw this, it was such a combination of sci-fi, scary, action, and I think I think that the original Terminator, one of the reasons I like it better than Part 2, even though Part 2 was almost a perfect movie, if not perfect, I'm going back to taste, because to me they're both perfect, but the one that I have the most nostalgia for, and that's my taste, is the first one, and I'll tell you why. I think it's more serious than the second one. The second one was dead serious, don't get me wrong, it was very serious, had serious elements, all that stuff. But I think the first one was more serious, a little more scary, even though I really don't get scared by movies, except there's only a couple that ever have. But I think it's scarier. I think it's more serious. And I'll tell you why. Because in part one, and they didn't have this in part two, they had flashbacks or flash forwards, however you want to put it. But in the first one, they showed the underground, how people were living underground, and it had that hopeless type music. It had just the perfect music when Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn, who did such a great job in his role, and it's when he's pretty much telling Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, who also did a fantastic job, and she was having a dream. Well, in this dream, the great James Cameron took the opportunity to show you part of the past inside the dream all at once. And what it showed you is people starving. People were starving to death, trying to survive. It had that hopeless music, how they were living underground. The machines were killing and crushing everybody, crushing in a figurative way and maybe literal, up during the night, up on the earth, on the level ground, but below they were suffering, they were starving. You had the machines on top, the hunter killers, HKs, looking for them to destroy them. And you had that very fascinating scene when one of the Terminators played by bodybuilder Franco Columbo, and he did a really good job, believable. And the way it was shot was more scary and serious than the second one. I thought it had that music that matched so well. And not only were people starving, this was the height of the Cold War, or one of the Cold Wars, where there's more than one, but it was the height of the Cold War, Soviet Union, mutual assured destruction, duck and cover, drop, duck and cover, all that stuff. And I think that really, really struck a chord with a lot of people. The approach that James Cameron took, and it just matched perfectly for the time. And the height of the Cold War, nuclear, possible nuclear annihilation, everyone was thinking about that. And then you had this story about the machines rising up. And then, of course, in part two, it expands on it more, and it talks about how Skynet made Russia and the United States nuke each other, essentially, and started this kind of nuclear holocaust. But yeah, part two is really great. But I like part one because I think it really was a little more intense. It showed the hopelessness, and it showed. I loved how it was shot. Remember how it showed the buildings crumbling, falling apart, and the HK machines destroying and blowing people up. I really think that was very well done. Have a lot of nostalgia for it. I think it was not only well directed, well written, well acted, and I think the concept was just so fascinating. Back then, no one was really thinking as deeply, I think, and no one was really ready for it. And when James Cameron presented this to the world, uh, wow, I think it blew people away. So that original Terminator is my favorite. Pretty much everyone has seen it now, but if you haven't, buy it, watch it. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger does such a great job as the Terminator. Um, Everybody does a fine job, really good job in their roles. And it's got a little humor in there too. It's kind of funny, very serious, a lot of action. If you haven't seen it, most people have. If you haven't, watch it. It's one of the best sci-fi action movies of all time, mixed in with a lot of drama, scary. It's compelling, it's not just an action movie. It's got a lot of depth to it. One I had a lot of nostalgia for. I saw it once or twice at the theater, actually. And then when it came on VHS, I couldn't wait. I rewatched it over and over and over again. I remember Predator also when that came out. We rewatched it over and over and over again. But yeah, Terminator, it's still my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. That would be my number one Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. And then for two and three, the second and third and fourth spots, they interchange. It depends on what mood I'm in. I think he's done a lot of fun films, really a lot of fun films. Great inspiration as a bodybuilder, influencing people to work out. And the Terminator, please, if you haven't seen it, watch it. And it's a movie that I'll always rewatch from time to time. And it's a movie that I grew up not only watching, but I showed my friends. I said, gee, you got to see this film. You got to see this film. And just the sci-fi, the time traveling aspect, there's so many bits and pieces. There's so many layers to this movie. The music, this was a time in the 80s when the music was fantastic too. You had great movies, great music. Every decade has great movies and great music, but we had so much more in the 80s. There were so many of them, and they had that unique 80s style, even though every decade has great stuff. The 80s was very unique. And this movie, I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it, you're in for a treat. In fact, I envy you because you're going to watch one of the best movies for the first time in your life. And I hope that you do watch it and enjoy it. And especially if you like this type of film, the action, sci-fi, I think you'll really enjoy it a lot. So this has been the late night review. And have a good night. And until next time, take care, everybody.